This morning, if you have a Bible, let me invite you to turn to 1 Peter chapter 2. We'll be in there, and I'm kind of breezing through some of those verses, and then we'll land in chapter 3 and verse 9 as we close the message. But I want to ask you some questions this morning. We're in the different series, and today we're talking about a different calling in a dark world. We're called to do something. And when you think of the word calling, accompanied with that is responsibility. If someone called me to do something, then I would recognize that I'm responsible to carry something out, that there's something that I need to do. And responsibility is not something that we hear about a whole lot today. And today, whenever we're all talking about what rights we have, and that's the only thing you hear about is I have a right to do this and a right to do that. But you rarely hear somebody stand up and say, I have a responsibility to pay my bills. I have a responsibility to get a job. I have a responsibility to be respectful. I have a responsibility to be an encouragement to somebody, or to be helpful, to stand on my own, to learn, to do my own grades, or whatever it happens to be. Then this contrast between responsibility and rights creates a magnification on that tiny, small group of people who are responsible. And that contrast is what does it. When I was first saved, there was more of a contrast in my life when I first got saved than there is now. And excuse me, I think the reason is that prior to me getting saved, I was living an entirely different life. And then whenever I got saved, my life flip-flopped, and it was really obvious for people to see, and there was a massive contrast to what people knew of me and what they were presently seeing of me. I used to have students that went to New Hanover High School, where I graduated as a Wildcat. The only school that's in, is there another school in Wilmington? So anyway, they were barely there whenever, Laney was a figment of our imagination whenever I was in high school. So only the last year. But nonetheless, they would come in and they're like, they'd see my name out on the marquee and they're thinking, is that the Kenny Chin that I went to school with? And then they would come in and they could not stay. I've almost never had one of my high school students ever stay. And it's because they come in, it's like, that cannot be, I can't see that, that's no possible way, I can't handle that. And they would leave. Now they still keep in touch with me, but they've just never been able to embrace the fact that there's really that much difference. But now here I'm 29 years later, and back then it was unexpected the way that I would act, but today it's expected. Today you would think it's strange of me if I didn't act certain ways, believe certain things, do certain things. You would think it would be kind of strange. And so I just want to ask you a question today. Have you leveled out in the church? Because whenever you cut a cross-section across a church, there's just a normalcy to Christianity. And are you swimming in the normal Christianity, or are you always kind of going to the next level and there's something different about you? And the Apostle Peter is dealing with a group of people who are experiencing something that not everybody experiences. Not every Christian community experiences what Peter's talking about. I told you last week that they were being challenged for their faith, and being challenged because Nero accused them of burning down Rome. And so there was this false perception that people had of this Christian community. Coupled with that false perception was also this issue of some of the practices that the Christian community was carrying out were misperceived. For example, the two big things that the nation, or I should say that this Christian community that Peter's writing to the dispersed groups, was the fact that they were incestuous and that they were cannibals. You think, what? There was a huge belief that they were incestuous and they were cannibals. So they felt like, man, they're over there having relations with their family members. Well, where did they get that from? Well, back in the day, and you can read about this in 1 Corinthians, not every time, but if we ever go to 1 Corinthians chapter 11 or chapter 10, when we're dealing with the Lord's Supper, Paul will remind us that there were these gatherings that the Christian community would have, and they called them love feasts. Now, I want you to think about Christians I'm going to invite you to the love feast tonight. and I want you to bring your brothers and sisters with you to the love feast. Now, just take that thought and imagine what somebody who's not engaged with us, has no idea who we are, and they just heard, they're having a love feast with their brothers and sisters. They assumed that we were incestuous. And at the love feast, guess what they celebrated? They celebrated this thing that they called the Lord's Supper, at which they would claim, this is my body, which is broken for you. Take and eat it. And this cup is the New Testament in my blood, as often as you drink it. And they would proclaim that Jesus said that if you don't eat my body and if you don't drink my blood, that you have nothing to do with me. So you couple those two things together, and they have this opinion about us that we are incestuous cannibals who burned down the city of Rome, and we need to be excommunicated from the world. Now, none of that is true. But nonetheless, even though it's not true, they believed it to be true. And so here's the question that we have to ask ourselves today, and this is the hard part about what Peter is saying and the sobering truth of what he's trying to say, and that is that, hey, you guys are going through suffering right now for what they think that you're doing because they're unfounded lies, but nonetheless, they believe it to be true, and you're being persecuted for it, and you're not responding right to this persecution. And he says, the reason you're not responding right is there is something more at stake here than your life. Because you're saved. And if you die, which many of you will, you'll end up in heaven. But for these people that are misled and misunderstood, if they die, they end up in hell. So what's really at stake is the salvation of the lost souls out there in the world that don't really know who Jesus is, but they have a preconceived notion of who he is. And so that's what's at stake. And as a result of that, here's the sobering truth. Peter says what the world thinks of Jesus is determined by what the world thinks of you. We're the representatives of Jesus Christ in this world. And so you do realize that the person out there on the street that doesn't come to church, that knows nothing about God, they don't say, you know what? I've been thinking that I'm going to figure out who this Jesus guy is. I think I'll just read this book. They don't do that, right? They don't do that. They don't want to have anything to do with this book. They don't even know what's in there. What they do is they'll say, well, I'll tell you what, I know some Christians. I know who this Jesus is all about. I'll tell you who they are. Because see, today we don't wrestle with the fact that we're incestuous or cannibalistic. We don't fuss, we don't argue with that. We don't have that against us. I'll tell you what we do have against us is that they say that we are hypocritical, that we are judgmental, that we are ignorant, that we are bigots, that we don't like anybody who isn't exactly like us, and that we criticize everyone. And we have some well-meaning, misunderstood, misdirected believers who have helped us to earn those titles. There are some out there. You do realize that it is the minority voice that generally establishes the definition for a group, not the majority of who the group is. So there are churches out there, and I will call a name, and you would know this. Westboro Baptist Church is a church that goes out there and criticizes everybody, protests everybody, including our military men and women, and they do not represent me. But the people that know Westboro don't know Northside, and they don't know across the street, and they don't know half the churches or all of the churches around America, but that's all they see. And since that's what they see, that's what they believe we are. Now here's the question. Should we and are we? Should we be concerned about the salvation of people that don't know Jesus? I think the answer should be yes. Are we concerned about the people that don't know Jesus? If we're not, we should be. So then if we are, then we've got to be concerned about people's understanding of who Christ is, because their understanding of Christ will determine whether they'll come to him or not. And if we're going to be concerned about that, then we need to be concerned about their perception of us, since that's the perception they have of Christ, so that they could be saved. So we need to take a look at what do we need to do or be if we're going to be the kind of people that can represent Jesus well. Well, the Apostle Peter comes and he says, guys, I want you to know that you're not responding appropriately, and because you're not, they're getting a false perception of who your Savior is. And so I want you to do something different. I want you to be different. I want you to act different. And I want you to know that you have an opportunity right here in front of you that is going to allow you to display God in a way that can't be displayed any other way. And his answer is our response to suffering. You see, the world gives attention to suffering in any form. If there's a crying baby in a restaurant, everybody looks, right? You notice. If there's a child in the middle of the mall that wanted something and their parents said no and they have a meltdown in the middle of the mall, people look. If you're at work and a disgruntled employee gets mad and through rage just cusses everybody out and they throw stuff around, I'm going to quit and I'm going to get out of here, everybody looks. But who are they looking at? Well, they first turn to look at the commotion that's going on, but then they look to the responsible party to see what is their response. So if you see a child crying in a restaurant, you're hoping, you're praying to the Lord that the mom or the dad or the grandma or the grandpa or whoever's there is going to pick that child up and comfort them or do whatever they need to do, right? That's who you're looking to. I mean, you look at the baby like, oh, that poor child is a child. You can't help it. I mean, babies don't know. But then you look at them. Like, you going to do something? Right? And then if you see this child melting down in the mall because they didn't get something, they're stomping their feet, and you're thinking, if that was my kid, I'd take care of it. And then you try to telepathically pass that thought on to that parent that's ignoring that child. Or if you have a disgruntled employee who's so mad and you know maybe they just had a bad day and something triggered them and they just go off. And you're looking, what is the boss going to do? And if the boss just ignores it and he leaves this bad feeling all over the place and you think, what a terrible boss. Because you're looking at the responsible party. Well, guess what? When people look into the church, suffering provides an opportunity in the church to display Jesus in a way that very few things do. Very few things. I mean, if we're happy when we're happy, nobody pays really any attention to that. If when everything's going well, we're doing well, nobody pays attention to that. I mean, they may see it, but it doesn't log anything into their brain. But when something goes bad, when something goes wrong, when you're done wrong, everybody's looking to see what you're going to say or what you're going to do. And so in this context, the Apostle Peter says, guys, let me help you understand that your responses are incorrect because you're just mouthing off to people. And I want to encourage you to not argue with words, but argue with your life. In other words, here's what he says. Don't convince them to believe like you believe, but show them that you believe what you believe by how you live. Literally what he's saying is you cannot come to people. You've got to come first with a gospel life before you can come with a gospel message. Because if you don't have evidence for what you've done and what you believe, your message has no concreteness to it whatsoever. It's just words. And so he's encouraging us to be different when it's really hard to do. And so over the next few minutes, I want to share with you, I want to ask you 3 questions that I think will help us to look and see, hey, maybe we're like this group of people that Peter's talking to, and we haven't been responding right. So we haven't to date. He's okay with that. But now he says, I want to help you to approach life a little bit differently, and I want to do so by asking some questions. The first question I want to ask is this. Have you accepted who you are? I remember sometimes whenever I would get in trouble in my own family, my dad would say to me, Kenny, do you know who you are? I'm like, yeah, I know who I am. Yeah, man, Kenny. He said, no, you're a Chin. And whatever you do reflects on the chins, on our good name. And so you need to do the right thing. You need to do it the right way, regardless of what's going on. The Apostle Peter says, I'm not sure you guys know who you are, so I want to help you with that. And listen to what he says in verse 9 of chapter 2 in 1 Peter. He says, you are a chosen generation. You are a royal priesthood. You are a holy nation. You are God's own special people who have been called there to proclaim the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. And so I don't know that the nation really understood what was going on, because in a time of persecution, there is this sense like, what's going on? Why is this happening to me? God, what are you doing to me? And our goal is to escape it and get out. But Peter says, if you're going to make it through, you're going to have to really grab a hold of who you are. Because I think that maybe, just maybe, it's not the world who needs to know who we are. I think maybe we need to be convinced of who we are. That we haven't yet figured out who we are yet. And so he basically gives us 4 things. I just want to give them to you quickly. Number 1, he says, and it's not on the screens, he says, you're a chosen generation. Now don't focus on chosen for a minute, focus on generation. Because a generation is not an eternal thing. It's a very small window of time. And it's a very specific group of people. Persecution, like Peter's talking about, doesn't come along very often. It's only come along a handful of times over the last 2,000 years. There could be decades, there could be centuries between this level of persecution. But these folks, because they were claimed that they were burning down Rome and they were incestuous and they were cannibals, that they were being ousted by murder and suffering and torture. And he says, I need you to know something. You are a chosen generation. This does not happen to every generation. This does not happen to every group of people. But God knew what was going to happen at this particular time, and he knew that you guys could handle what was going on at this particular time for this particular purpose. You're a chosen generation. I feel like that we're not on that level of persecution, though some places like in China and India and places like that, they're certainly suffering that. And here in America, we don't suffer quite exactly that same way, but I think that we're there in that persecution area where we're being charged for our profession of faith, not the activity of our life. And so I try to help people, I try to do good for people all the time, and I'm not being judged by the good that I do, I'm being judged by the label that I wear, and I wear the label Christian. And so out there we got a bad rap. So we're at least in that level. And God says, you know what? In this particular generation, I'm trusting that you guys are capable of not sitting around being the victim, not sitting around whining and fussing and moaning, but that you can actually be my witnesses in this generation, and I'm choosing you to do it. We're a chosen generation. He says that we are not only a chosen generation, but we're a royal priesthood. And they would have understood this maybe more than we do, but a priest is someone who could make sacrifices on the behalf of God. They were authorized to make sacrifices on the behalf of God. So it says, in this particular situation, guys, I want you to know that though you're chosen to help out here, I also want you to be aware that what's going to have to happen is a sacrifice of your life, and you are an authorized priest to make these sacrifices so that you know what's going to happen in this particular time. He says, you're not just a chosen generation and a royal priesthood, but you're also a holy nation. You have been called out from this world, called out from this group to be different. You're not supposed to look like, act like, feel like, dream like, party like everybody else. You're supposed to be different. And I've called you out for my very specific purpose. And my purpose for you to be called out was to proclaim my praises to all of you, to all of that world, who I am, even in the midst of the most challenging situation in your life. Do you know who you are? Because sometimes it's difficult, even in mixed company, to be able to let somebody know. They're like, you're not one of those believers, are you? And of course, now the Apostle Peter's like, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know who that Jesus is. I don't know what's going on. So believe me, he's got experience of what it means to deny. He's got experience of what it means to blend in. He's hanging around the fire and he's acting like, I don't know what you're talking about. But he also, because of that, he recognizes, hey, there's the time to take a stand. And on the day of Acts, in Acts chapter 2 on Pentecost, we see Peter standing up. He says, I just want you guys to know who I am, who I stand for, and what I'm about. And so he had evidence of what it took to be out there to do that. Do you know who you are? A second question that I want to ask you this morning, though, is, do you understand the power of your influence? Like, because of who you are, you have a platform and you have a power and you have a message that can actually influence other people toward Christ. And we've got to figure out, can we embrace that? And this is not fun, by the way. It's not like, oh, I'm so looking forward to going out there and being murdered today. tortured today, eaten by the lions today, or something like that. But in Peter's day, he was basically saying this, guys, guess what? Whether you want to be eaten by a lion or not, you're still going to get eaten by the lion. Since you are anyway, why don't you go out with purpose? Because God will reward it. It's going to happen to you anyway. And so I want you to think about the power of your influence. In verses 11 and 12, here's what Peter says. He says, beloved, I beg of you, as sojourners, as these temporary residents on this planet, to abstain from fleshly lusts which war against your soul. And those fleshly lusts were very determined in this particular situation. It was the desire to retaliate to the things that were coming your way. He says, having your conduct honorable among the Gentiles, honorable among those that don't know Jesus, honorable among those that are not part of the family of God. That's where our conduct needs to be honorable, is out there among those that we're trying to reach. And so he says, I want you to make sure that you do that. He says that when they speak against you as evildoers, because they're going to. They don't know any better. They don't know any different. They don't recognize that what they believe is a lie, so they're going to speak evil against you. He says that they may, by your good works, as they observe them, glorify God in the day of visitation. So here's what he's saying. Suffering and persecution provides you an opportunity to show the world that is looking. Because sometimes they're not looking, but they're looking here. They're looking. You have an opportunity when they're looking to do something, good works, that they'll pay attention to and go like, really? I didn't know that. When I was a kid, I remember we lived in California, Wilmington, California, as a matter of fact. We lived over there. It's just outside of Los Angeles. And I remember at that time, it was sort of the Cold War. And the Cold War was a war of words. And basically it was America talking bad about Russia, Russia talking bad about America. We're all going to nuke each other. And so we had to go through these tests or drills where we get up under our desk. So, because I don't know if you know this or not, but a high school or a middle school desk or an elementary desk, it's nuclear bomb proof. And so if you just get under it, put your hands on the back of your neck, you're going to make it, you know. So we had to go through that stuff. And I was taught that the Russians, they just wanted to kill us. And they hated us. And they were evil and wicked people, that the Russians were, as well as the Chinese. And I was Chinese. It was like, oh yeah, I killed him Chinese. Because I'm an American, right? So anyway, it was like all that stuff was going on until later on in life, and especially after I got saved and I began to travel around the world. And guess what? I found myself among a group of Russians. And I was like, I didn't bring my gun to this gunfight. And as I began to get to know those Russians, I was like, you guys are like really nice. And they said, so are you. I'm like, well, what do you mean, so am I? They're like, we thought you were here to kill us. I thought you were here to kill me. I'm like, no, we never want to kill you guys. We like you guys. Matter of fact, we like a lot of things in America, but we can't say that because our government will kill us. And so you found out, it's like, wait a minute. What I was taught to believe wasn't true because of the way that they treated me and because of the way that I treated them. It began to change an opinion about what things are. And you know what I've discovered since then? There are other people out there that are actually really nice people that we have been told to not like without any evidence or proof whatsoever that they're not good people. Like it would be helpful if you just went and talked to them. So, you know, whenever I was in different areas, and I was in Syria, and when I was in Syria, they were bombing. They were actually bombing in Syria whenever I was over there. And here I'm on the ground in Syria, and I met some Syrians, and it was like, they didn't want that bombing going on. They didn't want people hurt. You know what I've discovered? It's not the people, it's the leaders. And the leaders are the minority voice that share so that we think the same thing about everybody, and it's not really true. Now, it can be true in certain areas, but by and large, it's not really that true. And God says, I'm giving you an opportunity to share in such a way that the world will see you differently. I'll never forget, I am not for abortion, I'm for life, very, very clearly. But there used to be a life chain that was out there, and I would stand out there. And I remember going to the committee for the life chain, and I said, hey guys, I just want to make a suggestion. And they said, what's that? And I said, well, we're holding up signs that says, Jesus loves and abortion kills and y'all are murderers and stuff like that. And I said, I get that. I get that. But do you think that anybody who might be potentially contemplating an abortion is going to come up to us and say, hey, can y'all help me? I said, I don't think they will. What if we put a phone number on the front of the card that said, hey, are you challenged? Are you struggling? Do you need help? Call this number. We'll help you. I think it would have been much, much more effective. And then maybe we could support Lifeline Crisis Pregnancy Center like we did for one of these, that we could support them so that whenever young men and young women find themselves in trouble and they, it's already done, that maybe we could help them some and they would find out, wow, I thought they were just going to judge me and criticize me and point fingers at me and kick me out. Instead, what they did is they recognized, no, I wish they hadn't have done that, but we still love them. What did Jesus say? In Matthew chapter 5 and verse 11 and following, on the Sermon on the Mount, before he ever got to this time, here's what he said. He said, blessed are you when they revile you and persecute you and say all kinds of evil against you falsely for my name's sake, for my sake. He says, rejoice and be exceedingly glad, for your reward, for great is your reward in heaven. For so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its flavor, where shall it be seasoned? It is then good for nothing but being thrown out and trampled underfoot by men. He says, you're the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do they light a lampstand and put it under a basket, but they set it on a lampstand so it gives light to all that are in the house. And he gives this major, major statement. He says, let your light so shine that they will see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. So now catch what Jesus said. He didn't say, rejoice when you get persecuted, enjoy persecution, like persecution. That is not what he said. He said, rejoice when this happens because you have an opportunity at this moment to change a person's mind about who Christians are and about who Christ is. You have that opportunity so that you can let your light shine during this time. And what will end up happening is they'll stop persecuting you and they will start giving glory to God. So it's not that we like persecution, but there's an opportunity to do this. You ever thought about the influence that we could have in somebody's life? And then thirdly, I want you to ask yourself this question. Have you ever considered your example from Jesus? Jesus didn't ask us to do something that he didn't first do. The Bible says this in verse 21, chapter 2. He says, for this you were called, because Christ also suffered for us, leaving us an example that you should walk in his steps. In other words, Jesus said, I went out there and did it first to show you exactly how to do it so that you would understand. Now, I don't know if you listen to people very much or not, but when I was about 21 years old, I'm 56 now. When I was around 21 years old, I don't know if you knew this about me or not, but I was brilliant. I was. As a matter of fact, I'm not sure that I knew a smarter person at that time than me. And not only that, but the older generation, completely stupid. They basically knew nothing. And I was such a genius at 21. You couldn't tell me anything. You couldn't show me anything. What I realized was, these old fogies that were trying to help me out, if they understood how smart I was, they wouldn't have been saying it in the first place. But at the same time, I'd learned some new stuff, What I forgot was it was new to me, not to them. It was the first time the 21-year-old heard it. It was about the 50th time they'd heard it. But I didn't know that. So since it was new to me, obviously, there's no way they could have known it. My dad was too dumb. He was too dumb. He just barely got a high school education, so there's no way. And, I'd gone to school, so obvious how smart I am, and how dumb he was, and how dumb all of his friends were, and how dumb the older generation, because they were completely dumb. And now, as I was going out there at 21 years old, spewing out my genius, can I tell you what the older generation was thinking? Idiot. moron, young person, whatever. And the reason was not because they didn't believe what I was saying, but they had experienced something, and the principles that they were going to apply to that had already been proven true, and they realized that what I was saying was wrong. Now, I'm the only one that didn't realize that, but they knew that, so they gave very little credibility to what I was saying, because what I was saying was what I was saying, not what I had done. What I was saying was what I had learned in class and somebody else said, not what I had tested. It was just, I was brilliant about how it was going to be, and I could tell everybody the way that it was going to turn out. At 56 years old, I am nowhere near as smart as I used to be. I get dumber and dumber and dumber and dumber as every day goes on. And not because I have Alzheimer's or something like that, because the older I get, the more I realize that I don't really know. That I really don't. And the more I realize how much I need other people around me that have great wisdom. And the folks that are older than me that can tell me about things that they've actually experienced that I personally have not yet experienced. I don't know. I've had people to tell me, wait till you get 70. I'm like, when I'm 70, I'm going to be just fine. I remember saying, when you hit 40, your body falls apart. Not this body. At 40, my body fell apart. It really did. At 50, all you see is doctors. And you can tell you're 50, 55 or up because we talk about what medication are you taking? What doctor you go to see? How many appointments do you have this week? Have you tried that? Hey, can I make a recommendation? I'm not even kidding. Let me make a recommendation to you. Blue Emu. Holy moly. Forget that Bengay stuff and all that. Blue Emu. It is instantaneous. It'll take away, oh my goodness, it's awesome. I put some on my ankle today. I was like, that thing worked. So, what am I preaching about? So, hey, he says, listen, have you considered your influence and have you considered your example that Jesus gave? Jesus has walked this road before. And he expects us to walk the same road that he has walked. How did he walk? Listen to what it says, verse 22. It says, he committed no sin. Let me pause on that one just for a second, because I want to move you away from salvation for just a second. It's not talking about his sinlessness. It's not talking about his sacrifice of Christ. It is not talking about salvation. It is talking about when he was charged for something that was falsely charged against him, he did not retaliate in a way that would have been sin. So he was extending to us an example that even though we get falsely accused, we can be sinless just like he was sinless in not responding in a way that would be wrong or be harmful to somebody else. So he said in his challenge, he committed no sin. In our challenge, we don't have to commit sin. And he says this, no deceit was found in his mouth, which means he didn't say this over here and then this over here. It wasn't like, oh, I'm just doing this so I'll look good. He was saying the truth because he was good. And we can do the same thing. He says, who when he was reviled, he did not revile in return. He wasn't in any arguments. You remember they took him to the cross? What did he say? Nothing. 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 He didn't revile. And it says, and whenever he didn't threaten anybody. He didn't say, boy, I'll tell you what, if I get out of here, you wait. You wait. You'll get yours. I'll pay you back. He says, but instead he committed himself to him who judges righteously. He had a perspective that was, God's going to answer. I got to answer to God for this, not other people. So let me not do anything with these other people. Let me just lay this before the feet of God. And I know that if I do the right thing, I'm going to be okay before him. He says, who himself bore our sins in his own body on the tree, that we, having died to sins, might live for righteousness, by whose stripes we were healed. Please, if you don't catch anything, catch this. In Isaiah 53, where it talks about this, and in Matthew, where it talks about this, and in Peter, where it talks about this, we have a generation that believes that that statement, by his stripes we are healed, is some kind of blanket healing method that we can say, hey, we've already received the healing. We've already done that. And talking in a physical type situation. Can you imagine the Apostle Peter making that statement to a group of people who are presently being burned at the stake, who are being persecuted, who are being skinned alive, who are being beheaded? That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. That he's like, hey, you're going to be healed from this. Here's what he's saying. I want you to imagine Jesus as he's on his way to the cross, and somewhere in the middle he decides, I'm I'm not putting up with this, and I'm going to walk away. Had he walked away, you and I would be lost today. But he went all the way to the cross, and as a result of going to the cross, as a result of him responding rightly to what God asked him to do in the face of the persecution of people, he went to the cross, and every one of us now who have trusted Christ as our Savior have been saved because of what he did. By his stripes, by his bearing up under this, we have been able to be there. Now here's the question. Will there be anybody in your life as a result of your stripes that'll find Jesus? I was speaking with Rob Strickland this past week, and we've had 4 deaths since, I think, Wednesday. And one of those deaths was Rob's aunt. And she's been the executor of the will of Rob's uncle who died a few months ago. And so it's kind of all tangled up right now. And one of those deaths was a gentleman that Rob was ministering to in the hospital who had a heart issue, and Rob went to see him because we get a lot of calls sometimes about people just wants us to go see people that don't go here. And Rob is an incredible minister when he goes out there, great gospel witness. And so he went out there and he spoke to this gentleman, and he says, hey, but I know you're going to go into surgery and stuff, but before you go into surgery, could I just ask you the question, if you died in this surgery, if you die right now, do you know that you would find your way into heaven? And this guy began to tell Rob a story about how he had somebody when he was around 12 or something like that, that told him a story about something, had nothing to do with the gospel, and he was kind of leaning on that for his salvation. And so Rob said, well, that's not really the gospel, and that's not what salvation is. Would you mind if I share? He says, no, go right ahead. And so Rob shared the gospel with the gentleman, but he didn't accept it. He just said, oh, okay. And I found out later that Carolyn Bell, also one of our members here that works at the hospital, that she had the opportunity to minister to this guy and also reinforce that gospel message in his life. Well, he's going in for heart surgery, and they're concerned about infection in this heart surgery. So I guess he had some teeth that needed to come out. They said, we need to pull your teeth first. And when they did, he died. And I asked Rob, I said, did he ever get saved? He says, I don't know. I don't know. Rob's aunt, who died all by herself in her home, and they had to do an emergency call on her, and it was like she'd been in there for like 3 days. And so I was talking to Rob, and I said, hey, did Susie ever trust Christ? Because he had told me one time in the past, he said, Susie, and pardon my language, but here's how she said it. He said, Susie said, it'll be a cold day in hell before I'll ever enter into a church or listen to that message. And so I witnessed to Susie, Joe Easterling witnessed to Susie, Rob Strickland witnessed to Susie, as well as some other people had witnessed to her. And she died. Where's she at? I don't know. That's up to God. We never know what a person has done. And I began to think about his aunt. And as I was thinking about her, because of what she said, I thought, I wonder when there would ever be an opportunity for this woman to make a decision for Jesus. And I got to thinking about Rob, because Rob grew up in that entire family. And I know that whole family. I've known Rob since he was 5 years old. And we traveled together. We spent the nights at each other's homes. We went to everybody's family members. And so I knew all of Rob's family members. Rob's mother was lost all of her life until the last few days before she died. She accepted Christ as her Savior. And so I began to think. I said, Rob, do you realize, had I not gotten saved, I don't think you ever would have. Because there never would have been an opportunity for the church to somehow, and the message of the gospel to somehow find its way in your pathway. That it wouldn't happen. Because we do church in here. And we do church on Sunday. And if we ever try to reach it out on a day other than the Sunday, it's almost like it's heresy to witness on like Tuesday. That would be bad or something. And if we didn't do it in here, that somehow it's unholy. When in fact, in reality, you could go out there. You know that Jesus, he got criticized because he left the synagogue and went down to the beach. And he had this thing called the Sermon on the Mount. It's the sermon at the beach. It's on the shores of Galilee. I've stood on those shores where he shared that message, and he was trying to get the message of the gospel out there to people that were never going to be able to hear it because they weren't allowed into the synagogue. And I thought, Rob, if I'd have never gotten saved, I'm trying to figure out, because he made sure he stayed away from church, away from preachers, away from the gospel, away from the Bible, away from everything. And Rob thought whenever you died like a dog. You were just dead and it was over. It took me 7 years of witnessing to Rob before he got saved. And I would, as the pastor, I would give like 95 stanzas of Just As I Am. One day, I'm telling you, one day, Dale Easterling came up to me and he said, Kenny, you can't save him. You know, you can't keep these invitations going forever. And the day that Rob got saved, I wasn't even paying attention. And he walked down and I was like, what do you want? He said, I want to be saved. I like to fell out on that day. Here's what Rob said. He said, I'm in your spiritual family tree. And I was like mind blown when he said that. Because I thought, you know, immediately I see the commercials on TV. You see all the family tree stuff. And I ask myself the question, who's in my family tree? I am saved today in part, but a large part because of my wife, who basically led me towards coming to church and getting to know the Lord. I'm saved in part and in a large way by Alan McKeith, and I'm saved in part and a large way by Dale Easterling, who had a major impact in my life. These people are in the lower end of my family tree. They're the ones that are before me, that really helped me. Who's after me? Did my tree have one sprout that was me? And that was it. That's it. But it's not. I have brothers that are in my family tree, sister-in-laws in my family tree, my dad's in my family tree, friends, family, strangers that are in my family tree, because I recognize that God says, I want you to be different so that other people might come to know who I am through your suffering. Not that I want you to suffer. I want people saved. And people need to have a model today. Not one that's conformed to the world. Not one that looks like the world. Not one that parties like the world. Not one that goes out there and spends like the world. Not one that invests like the world. But a true and genuine model that loves Jesus, that loves the world as God loved the world and gave his only begotten Son, that whoever would believe in him would not perish but have everlasting life, that we would be willing to give of ourselves for somebody else. God says, I need you to be different. You have a different calling, and it's a responsibility that you have in this different calling. So I want to end this message by asking you 4 questions that I'll put on the screen that I would love for you to contemplate this week. If you don't have anything to write them down, that's fine. Go to northsideilm.info, and the outline is on there, and these questions are on there. And I have them because I want you to think about them. The first question is this: what message does my life as is send to the people around me? So right now, without having anything changed, if a person was looking at your life, would they look at you and say, God, there's a complainer, there's a whiner, there's a gossip. Nothing's changed in their life. You think because they're Christians, they would be different. And they have no self-esteem, they have no self-worth, and they're always in competition with somebody else, and they're afraid that somebody's going to get something they don't have, and they're always doing that. Or would your wife say, I don't know what that person meant, who that person met, what's happened to that person, but they're different. They are different. I don't know why they do what they do or think the way they think, but they're always helpful. There's something different about them. What is it about your life as is that marks you as different and would send to the message to people around you? Number 2, what am I already doing that not just tells but shows people God's goodness? Is there anything out there? Terry and I were out in the community a few weeks ago, or it might have been a couple of months ago now, and we were looking for something for our home, and so we were going to Lowe's Home Store. And I keep a toolbox in my car. However, I don't have it in my car today, so if your car is broken down, I am really sorry. But normally I keep a toolbox in there, and I have a jump box in there, and a water jug and stuff like that. So in case you need something, bungee cords, I got the vest so you don't kill me at night if I get out of the car at night to try to help you. I'm just prepared to try to help somebody. And so when we went to Lowe's, there was a couple that had opened up on their truck. The hood was up, and they were looking in there like they didn't know what they were looking at, and it was a concern to me. And Terry, I said, Terry, I got to help these people. I got to help them. And of course, I only said that because she was getting ready to tell me, you need to help those people. Because it's both of us are kind of that way. So we got out of the truck and went over there and said, y'all need some help? It looks like you had a problem. I got the tools. I got a jump box. What you need? We got you. And they said, oh, no, we're fine. We just had our truck change the oil in it. It's got a smell of oil. We're not sure if they didn't tighten up something or they just spilled. We're not sure. We're just checking to see if we need to take it back to where it was. And I said, okay, well, I just want to make sure you're okay. And the girl says, I know you. That always scares me. It's like, you, from where? She said, I know you, but you don't know me. I said, okay, well, that's good. Who are you? And she introduced herself to me, and I still didn't know her. And she said, I'm Debbie Whitehead's sister. And I'm like, oh, okay. Well, it's good to meet you. You know, if you need any help, we'll be inside. We'll come out, whatever you need, if you need. And they're like, no, we're really good. And when we came and left, they were still outside. But I got a phone call not long after that from Debbie. And she said, hey, thanks for watching out for my sister. She was talking to my wife. She said, thanks for watching out for my sister. And said, it's even better that you didn't know who they were because that means it was real. Because, we can sometimes fake it out when we're trying. Oh, there's a church member. Let me look real good in front of that church member. But whenever you don't know who's who, it can be a challenge. Is there anything that you're doing good in your life? And now that was one of my good times. Don't pay attention to me when I'm driving. I was parked. I help anybody when I'm parked. I may need to carry a bag of tools around so when I push you into the ditch, I can help you get back out. It's still a challenge. It's still a challenge. I'm still trying to figure out whether you can't drive or I have a problem. I think it's a little of both. Number 3, what could I do differently to lead more people to Jesus? Is there anything that we could do, that we really could do to lead somebody else to Christ? People are lost, and I'm telling you, when I thought about these folks that have died this week, God, it's hard for me to think about that it is forever. Forever. And Rob, he was torn. He's like, I should have pushed harder. I'm like, I don't know if it would have made a difference. You had other people that did it, but man, when you understand that hell is forever, what can we do to make a bigger difference? And the last question I'll leave you with, and then we're going to close, is who in your life do you need to be different to this week? There's somebody in your life, there's somebody that's giving you a hard time or something's happened that you are justified in what you want to respond to. That they've done you wrong, they've stolen something from you, there's an inheritance. I don't know what it is, a family situation, whatever it happens, somebody's done something to you. And God says, I know. And you don't have to justify it. You don't have to prove to me that you have the right to do something. I know that you do. I'm asking you not to. I'm calling you to something different. And listen, when Jesus says, I want you to follow in what I've already done. And so when it comes to the church and people look in here, they remember words like, the church is supposed to be a forgiving place. The church is supposed to be a place of grace and mercy. And do they really see that? Do they see us forgive people? And you've got to forgive people that they can't do anything about what they did. That's what forgiveness is for. They can't make a restitution. There's nothing to do. And even when somebody's struggling in their life and they have absolutely nothing to offer, God says, give them grace. You've got to give them grace because they have nothing to offer. And I want you to see that I have given you something to give away. Doesn't matter whether they can give back or not. And when it comes to mercy, they're doing something that really deserves a retaliation. He says, don't you retaliate. You withhold that retaliation and you give them grace and you give them mercy and you give them forgiveness and you let me decide what happens to them. and great will your reward be, not here, but in heaven. And we think about, 30 years from now, whenever I die, God's going to have this written down. To that group of people, it would have meant, hey, I want you to do this, and in about 10 minutes, you're going to get your reward, because you're going to be dead in about 10 minutes. And I want you to know when you get to heaven, it's there. Whether it's 10 minutes or 10 years or 30 years, it's there. Guys, I want you to think about it. This is a tough generation, and yet God's entrusted us with this generation. I've been one that's kind of complained about this generation. This message really messed with me to say, hey, God was kind of saying, you need to shut up and you need to stand up and quit complaining about them and figure out what it is that you can do that would really change the direction of this generation. And that was for me. I don't know what it is for you. Maybe today you need to be saved. If you do, I want you to know we're here for you. We'll help you any way that we can. But if you've had a challenge in your life and a struggle in your life, I want to pray for you this morning. I want to ask you to stand as we pray. And I want to pray for you specifically that God's going to give you the ability for whatever name, situation, person, whatever He has put in your head today that you need to be different to, maybe even this afternoon. I want to ask God to give you the strength to do it. So would you join me in prayer? Father, thank you for the opportunity to love you and to be loved by you. And Lord, suffering and persecution is not joyful, but I thank you that you have shown us a way to find joy in doing it, knowing that what we do and the life that we portray has this incredible opportunity to change the opinion of somebody who maybe all of their life have hated the church, hated Christianity, hated Christ, hated the Word, but they really didn't know. And as they begin to interact with believers and realize that we do not wear a life that matches our label, but that we're different, that maybe then they will change their opinion about who you are. And maybe they'll realize you're not this cruel, mean, ogre type of a God waiting to zap them at every turn, but that you are a loving and a holy and a righteous God who loves them and gave your only begotten Son so that anybody who would trust Him would be saved and would not perish. Lord, it's our heart today that if there's any that need Jesus, that they would come. And if there are those who are struggling in life, I ask you to give energy and power and restraint, because you told us to abstain from fleshly lust, to have restraint for the things we would want to do to somebody, but instead that we would apply good works. And so, Lord, as we close this service, if there are any that need Christ, I pray they'll come forward. We'll help them. If there are any who need prayer, that they will come forward. We will help them. If there are any who just want a relationship and want to talk, that they would come forward and we would help them. For those who will now leave and enter into the mission fields of the world, I pray that they will go with power and go with grace, and that their life will be seasoned so that they would be the salt of the world, and that they would shine out there in difficult days. For we ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. God bless you guys. Love you. Thank you for coming.